Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for attending our webinar this afternoon presented by Manhattan Psychology Group. We can go to the next slide.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there you go. So thank you again, everyone, for who's joining us today. Today's webinar is titled Helping Your Child Build Emotional Resilience. Before I introduce to you today's speaker, I would like to tell you all about Manhattan Psychology Group. Since 2011, our team of 200 plus psychologists, behavior analysts, and educators provide wraparound care services, including psychological testing, applied behavior analysis, and educational services. We offer CBT, social skills groups, neuropsych testing, tutoring, parent training, and much more. We also offer virtual and in-person services for all ages and conditions, and serve the greater NYC metro area across all 5 boroughs, Northern New Jersey, Long Island, and Westchester. We accept private pay, commercial insurance for ABA, and DOE-funded services. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Our mission at Manhattan Psychology Group is to provide multidisciplinary integrated support for individuals and their families who experience psychological, developmental, and educational challenges. This means that our team works collaboratively to address all aspects of clients' needs and develop comprehensive treatment plans. We believe in a client-centered approach, which means that we prioritize the unique needs and goals of each individual we serve. With our range of services and expertise, we are committed to helping our clients and their families achieve their full potential. Next slide, please. And our vision at MPG is to provide comprehensive care that helps individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered. We believe everyone deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential, and we are committed to being a leading provider of wraparound care in the greater NYC metro area and beyond. Next, please. So I am excited to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Dr. Margaret Arezaga. Dr. Arezaga is our senior child, adolescent, and adult psychologist here at Manhattan Psychology Group. She has a specialization in parent-child interaction therapy and parent management training for children diagnosed with ADHD and/or disruptive behavior disorders. She also has extensive experience in working with children and teenagers using cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy for anxiety disorders, OCD, selective mutism, and more. All right, next slide, please. And without further ado, let us all turn our attention to Dr. Arezaga, who will be presenting to us today on helping your child build emotional resilience.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrew. Welcome, everyone. Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to get a sense of who's here with me today. And so if you can just let me know in our poll how old your children are or the children that you're working with are, just so I can get a sense of the audience.
Give me 1 second. I'm just trying to.
And I understand that maybe you have kids in multiple groups, okay? Or even I noticed that I didn't include 0 to 2, partially because we did a toddler talk not that long ago on toddlers with big emotions.
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay, I'm seeing a lot of B's.
Okay, cool.
And C's.
I'm going to try to work it out as you go.
So it looks like a pretty big range here. Some teenagers, all across the child development, from toddlers up to teenagers. Andrew, is that poll working, or shall I move on?
Yeah, can you move on? Sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you all for responding in the chat. That's helpful. So as Andrew mentioned, I do have a lot of experience and expertise using cognitive behavioral therapy for kids with anxiety, for kids with depression. And when we think about cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, it really focuses on helping people to understand how thoughts, behaviors, and emotions are connected. And we often teach kids, you also see my slides. We often teach kids. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulty. I think it's back. Okay, so we often teach kids and individual strategies for managing their big emotions, and those strategies tend to focus on thoughts and behaviors, right? So in terms of thoughts, helping kids to notice when they're helping kids to notice their thoughts and when they're falling into kind of thinking traps along the lines of, everything always goes wrong for me, or some kind of awful event that's going to happen in the future, right? And so we help kids to develop coping strategies related to those thoughts. So noticing their thoughts, challenging their thoughts, and coming up with coping thoughts, or thoughts that they can say to themselves instead. When we intervene on the behavioral aspect, we're often teaching kids things like relaxation techniques, deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. We are teaching kids to face their fears and practice in situations that make them anxious. Or we are helping kids to engage with friends and in the world rather than to isolate. And so, so those are the behavioral and the thoughts kind of parts of the cognitive behavioral therapy. But we also know as psychologists that emotions are a really important piece of helping kids. And when we think about emotions and kids who have big emotions and difficulty regulating their emotions, what we know is that it can really negatively impact peer relationships. It can impact the family environment dynamics at home. And when kids are younger and they have big emotions, other kids are usually more forgiving. They might notice, they might go over and try to help their friend and comfort them. But as kids get older, those same big emotions tend to cause more problems for kids. It makes them stand out among their peers. It makes their friends or peers kind of a little bit wary of being around them. And so they might start to avoid those kids who have big emotions. We also see at home in families that when kids have big emotions, parents and caregivers can kind of change their behavior because they don't want to set their kid off. So they might be walking on eggshells or moving things around so that they're not causing disruption. And this can negatively impact sibling relationships. It can create resentment at home. There can also be a lot of tension and fighting and stress in the house. We see it also impacting academic achievement when kids have big emotions. And the way that we see this is sometimes kids will avoid or procrastinate when they're feeling overwhelmed by anxiety or emotions related to their schoolwork. They can also become perfectionistic and take a longer time to complete their homework. And difficulty regulating emotion, we know, has long-term and short-term impacts, in that it makes kids more susceptible to experiencing anxiety or depression, and it also can negatively impact future success. And so just to look a little bit more at emotion dysregulation and what it is. I've said the words big emotions, and that's how I tend to describe kids who have difficulty with emotion regulation. And so what we find is that their emotional response seems disproportionate to the situation at hand. The situation that triggered it might seem very minor to those around them, but the reaction is big. The intensity of the emotion that they experience is big. Kids with difficulty regulating emotions, might feel out of control often. They might be overwhelmed by their emotion. They might have difficulty with frustration tolerance and get frustrated, giving up on tasks or things that they're doing easily. And they just really struggle to cope with their emotions in a way that is healthy or helpful to them. And that can look like a number of things. For some kids, it's tantrums and meltdowns. Other kids might engage in aggressive behavior towards others, throwing things, biting others, hitting family members. I once had a kid who would get frustrated every time he struck out at a baseball game, and he would throw his bat at the pitcher or turn around and yell at the umpire. So those are some ways that it might manifest. Also, some kids, and I tend to find this more in, preteens and teens, might engage in cutting or hitting themselves, hurting themselves. Younger kids might bang their heads. I had a girl that I worked with who would hit herself on her arms and legs with very heavy objects when she would get really upset. They might scream, cry, or whine, talk back, curse, say hurtful things to others. I hate you, you're the worst, you're not my friend, I hope you die, right? Statements along those lines. They might also have difficulty separating from their parents and seem very clingy. On the other end of that, they might withdraw or isolate, staying in their rooms, not talking to their caregivers, really isolating themselves. So our next poll, I'm wondering, what are the behaviors that your child tends to exhibit when they are struggling with big emotions and difficulty regulating those emotions? And, it might also depend on the situation. In some situations, you might see certain behaviors. In other situations, you might see a whole different set, right? It could depend on whether you're at home, whether in public, who's around, and you might see multiple of these at the same time. So I'm seeing tantrums a lot, talking back, cursing, screaming. Okay, those seem to be the most common. Okay, thank you. And so when we're thinking about emotions and how to help kids, right, to build that emotional resilience, it's important for parents to really have an understanding of emotions. And I really like the biosocial theory, which was developed by Marshall Linehan, who is the founder and creator of dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. And so this slide and a couple of the other ones are really going to be pulled from her work. And so I think if we can have a better understanding of our kids and their emotional experience, I think it helps us to better help them and to be less judgmental of, the way that they're responding, to be more understanding and more supportive. And I know we all want to help our kids. That's why you're here, right? And so the biosocial theory consists of two components. One that focuses on the biological vulnerability, and the other part that focuses on the social vulnerability. So we'll start with the biological vulnerability. So what we know is that everyone experiences emotions differently. The biological piece here is that we are wired differently in terms of how intense we experience emotions and how we respond and react to those emotions. And so a lot of the kids that I work with and kids who struggle with emotion dysregulation tend to experience big emotions or emotions that are more intense than their peers or their family members or other people around them. So it's as though the volume of their emotion is turned up. It's not necessarily that they're experiencing the wrong emotion, even though sometimes it can come across that way. It's more that, when they're feeling angry, they're feeling really angry. When they're nervous, they're really nervous, right? So again, that intensity of the emotion that they're experiencing is just turned up. That volume is turned up for them. And the other part of the biological vulnerability is that when kids who experience big emotions in that way, right, have a trigger, they experience the emotion, and then they tend to have a big or kind of quick reaction, right? So that they experience the emotion and then they react, right? It's like there's no time between their emotion and the response. And the response tends to be disproportionate, again, to the situation at hand. And, we might, as parents and adults, we might have experienced similar situations. You might know somebody who, or yourself might have maybe gotten a request from a boss or coworker or spouse and felt really frustrated and wrote back either in an email or a text something pretty harsh. And then a little later, when you're feeling calmer, thought, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have waited before I responded, right? And maybe not been happy with what you said in response. And so that happens for our kids too, where they experience these big emotions and they have this big immediate reaction. And then later on, they might say to themselves that they shouldn't have done it, or maybe they kind of don't. And that sometimes parents can say that they feel like their kid has no regret or no remorse. And so it can kind of go either way. It could just be that they're not kind of expressing their reaction to the situation, or expressing their regret or remorse in the situation. So they have these big emotions, big or quick reaction. And then the third part of this, and I see someone's hand up, the third part of this is the return to baseline. And so what I mean by this is that for kids who have a big emotional response and then react, sometimes it can take a really long time for them to get back down to their baseline. So for some people, it might take hours. For some people, it might take a day or multiple days, right? The other thing that I hear from parents often is that in some situations, or maybe all the time, their kid actually returns to baseline pretty quickly, like too quickly, where they leave the room after they've just cursed at their parents or yelled and cried and screamed, had a meltdown, and then come back as if it had never happened. And the parent is still like reeling with emotion inside and trying to like process what just happened. And now their kid comes back and is acting like it didn't happen. So again, that big emotional response, the intensity turned up, the big or quick reaction, right? That impulsive kind of response. And then the return to baseline, either taking a really long time or taking a really short time. So I did see someone's hand up. Okay. I lost the person. Okay, if you want to take yourself off mute and jump in with a question, that's okay, whoever had their hand up. Otherwise, I am going to have time at the end where I'm happy to answer questions that you might have. Okay. So now let's take a look at the social environment, right? So again, these are kids who experience emotions more intensely. It's the way that they were biologically wired. They have a quicker response and can be more impulsive in their reactions. Again, the way that they were wired biologically. And then their return to baseline, also influenced by how they were wired, how they're biologically wired. And so when we look at these kids who have these big emotions and big responses, sometimes they are in an environment, whether it's peer group, teachers, parents, just the people around them seem to inadvertently send the message that their emotion is wrong, that what they're feeling is either just incorrect or it is out of the ordinary, dramatic, too big, too much, right? And they get this response pretty often. Stop being a drama queen, you're overreacting, right? Do you see anybody else acting like this? Right. And so what happens is they get this message pretty frequently. They feel as though their feelings and emotions are disregarded. They can also be discouraged from experiencing negative emotions or emotional expression. So saying things like, stop crying, there's no reason to be upset, right? Those sorts of things, or and sometimes it's not in a negative, punishing kind of way, but it's meant to be helpful, right? Stop, where parents might tell them to stop crying or calm down, right? And it's really because our own emotional distress in seeing our kids distressed, right? We want them to calm down. We want them to feel better. We don't want them feeling this way at our own discomfort with their negative experience of emotions, right? Influences us to kind of squash their negative emotion. And so this can be very invalidating for kids. We also see that parents, and I'm guilty of this from time to time as well as a parent myself, can oversimplify problem solving. Just take deep breaths, or just get out there and do it and you'll be fine, right? And they get that message that it's easy and that they can do it. And we want to encourage them, right? But we don't want to oversimplify it. Okay. And so this kind of mismatch between a person's emotional vulnerability and the environment around them can really cause some more difficulty for a kid. And so again, we have that biological vulnerability plus the invalidating environment. And what we find is that for kids who experience the world in this way, with that biological vulnerability and the social environment being invalidating of them and their feelings, we find that kids actually feel less in control of their emotions. They distrust themselves and their internal experience, how they're feeling, who they are, and they just feel more out of control. We find that when they feel more out of control, it actually increases the impulsivity, and it leads to some interpersonal difficulties because they feel misunderstood. They feel like nobody gets them, nobody understands them. And that's, that's what we want to work on today, right? Helping kids to feel understood, to feel heard, and helping them to build those emotional resilience tools. Okay. So now you might be wondering, okay, like what's normal here, and when should I be concerned? So when we are diagnosing a kid or determining whether or not they should seek treatment or get further help, we think about frequency. Of course, everyone can experience big emotions from time to time. We all do. But some kids experience it more frequently. So it might be multiple times a week. For some kids, it might be multiple times a day. And so you really want to think about how frequently this is occurring. The next thing we want to think about is the intensity, right? So we can all be vulnerable to experiencing intense emotions and having intense emotional reactions. And so, and that can depend on a lot of things, right? It could depend on how well did we sleep? Did we eat lunch or did we skip lunch? Are we hungry? What kind of stressors are going on around us? And, maybe if we are feeling really stressed by work, we might, our battery, our fuse might be a little bit shorter, right? So we want to think about intensity. Is this, are these reactions and big emotions happening in a very big way where it's constant fighting, breaking belongings, long-lasting meltdowns? And then the other thing that we want to think about is the impact on functioning, right? So is this causing a problem with peers, with friends, with family members? Is it interfering in a kid's ability to participate in extracurricular activities because maybe they give up easily, or they refuse to go, or they have just big reactions that their coach puts them on the bench because of, or things like that? We want to think about, is it impacting school? Okay. And so I think one of the main things and why I talk about the biosocial theory here is because I want parents to know, and I know that you know probably deep down, but sometimes it can feel like deliberate or attention seeking, or it can feel manipulative, right? But I want you to remember that emotion dysregulation is really a function of how they're wired and how the environment responds. And it's just a way of interacting in the world that we can really work to help them with. And it's not deliberate, it's not intentional, it's not manipulative. It's a lack of skills that they have, and coupled with this biological vulnerability. And we really see, why I do a lot of parent work in general. I feel like I do parent therapy or parent management training. I do PCIT. And even when I'm working individually with a child, I do like to incorporate parent sessions because I do think the parents have so much to provide to their children, given that you're the ones that are seeing your kids, or caregivers, you're the ones that are seeing your kids, day in and day out, and a therapist is with them an hour or 45 minutes a week, sometimes bi-weekly. And so I really think the parent-child relationship is important. And kids learn a lot about how to regulate their emotions through their relationship with their parents, through how their parents regulate their emotions themselves. And so the way that I'm going to be talking about how to help kids regulate their emotions and build that emotional resilience is by attending to your child's positive behavior and really building your relationship with your child, helping your child to label their emotions, and then by you really modeling how to manage emotions and feelings. So attending to positive behavior. So that's the first thing. And so we talk about pride skills in parent training, or positive attending skills. And so the P in pride stands for praising what your child does. And I know we have a range of ages that your kids are anywhere from look like 2 to the teenage years. And so you really want to think about what's developmentally appropriate in terms of how you're wording this for your kid. But in general, we all respond to praise, and we all like to get positive feedback and acknowledgement about the things that we're doing right or the things that we're doing well. And so for kids with difficulty regulating their emotions, you really want to be thinking about positive opposites. And so what I mean by that is think back to those behaviors that I asked you to in the poll, which ones were the most frequent. And so some of you said screaming, yelling, talking back, right? Having tantrums and meltdowns. And so when we think about those are behaviors that we're wanting to go away or to reduce, right? And the opposite of those behaviors are the ones that we want to praise. And so thank you for using a nice voice when you asked me, or thank you for explaining that to me so calmly, right? I like how you stayed really calm when you couldn't figure out your homework. Great job, having patience when you were waiting in line for a long time, right? Like really giving kids that positive feedback for those opposite behaviors of what we're working on. And so when you praise your kids in this way, it really reinforces those behaviors. It can become their internal dialogue. Stay calm in these situations. Reflecting is repeating back what your kids say. So you can repeat it back, paraphrase it, really shows that you're listening, that you're there supporting your child, that you're with them. I is imitate. So getting on their developmental level, showing them that you are approving of their choices and an activity, and just playing along with them or working along with them, whatever activity you're doing. D is for describe, and it's describing your child's positive behaviors. So it's not saying I like or great job, but it's just noticing the behaviors that they're doing. And then E is for enjoy. And so just showing your child that you enjoy spending time with them through your body language, nonverbal communication, smile, pat on the back, sitting close together, hug. So thinking about your child, which of these skills do you think would be most helpful in really fostering your relationship and making your relationship stronger? I think that's the poll popped up. Oh, there we go. All of the above. Yes, I agree. All of the above. And I think praise, yes. I see a variety of answers. It looks like most of you think all of the above. And I do agree. They're all useful in different ways. And so thank you for answering that. Okay, so when should I use these? Again, we're gonna, think about their developmental age. And so for younger kids, it might be a special playtime that you have with them. For older kids, pre-adolescent and the teenage years, you might just have to meet them where they are. What do they like to do? Can you join them in? Right? Even if it's social media, even if it's video games, right? Or if it's shooting hoops in the backyard, whatever it is, just joining them for 5 or 10 minutes, showing interest in what they're doing. You might not think that your teenager wants you there, and they might push you away initially. But I do often get from teenagers, one of the things that they want to work on is having a better relationship with their parents. You'd be surprised how many teens tell me that. So you would try to carve out 5 to 10 minutes per day, as many days as you can each week. And just for younger kids, like I said, you can tell them that it's mom and your special time, or dad and your special time, or our special playtime, whatever you want to call it. You'd put out 2 to 3 sets of toys, and you would do this away from distractions. And it's really a time for you to connect with your child. So it's not really important what activity, because that can absolutely depend on your child's age. For younger kids, 5 minutes is really enough. For older kids, we might do more, 10 minutes. But it doesn't need to be more than that to have a therapeutic effect on your child and improve the quality of your relationship. The goal in this one-on-one time with your child is to practice using those pride skills that I just talked about. Practice giving them more specific praise, describing what you see them doing, reflecting what they're saying to you, really being engaged. And building that strong, warm connection, which we know is protective for kids, especially for kids who have that emotional vulnerability. You want to pay attention to the positive, and we know that paying attention to the positive behaviors really does help improve kids' emotion regulation, their behavioral regulation, and so building that relationship. And again, away from distractions, away from siblings, if and when possible, away from the phone and TV. Okay, the next skill that I want to talk about, so that first one is really fostering a strong, connected, warm relationship with your child. The next one is helping your child manage their big emotions through validation. And so I did see some questions in the webinar chat box asking, what do we say to our kids? And I think validation is one of the most important things that you can do to help your child through a meltdown or through a situation where they're experiencing big emotions. So validation helps communicate to your child that you understand what they're feeling. You might not have been in their shoes before, but what they're experiencing makes sense in the situation. Again, thinking back to the biosocial theory, the emotion piece of this, right, is that not that their emotion is wrong, it's just the intensity is turned up too high. So it makes sense, probably in the situation, right, whatever it is, it makes sense that they're feeling frustrated. It makes sense that they're feeling mad, right? It makes sense that they're nervous, right? It's just that they're experiencing it more intensely. So we want to really communicate, it makes sense. I understand why you're feeling that way. I felt that way before, or other people I've seen other people experience that before. Just basically sending the message that they're feeling and the emotion that they're experiencing at that moment makes sense. Now, you might not agree with the intensity of it or love the intensity of it. You might not agree with what they're saying when they're experiencing that emotion or what they're doing when they're experiencing that emotion. So validating their experience of their emotion is not the same as agreeing with their behavior, right? We want to really differentiate the two, because I think sometimes parents get a little tripped up in that. So when you're validating the emotion, it does not mean that you agree with how they responded to their emotion. It just means that you understand where they're coming from. So when we validate a kid's emotions, we send the message that we understand. We send the message that it makes sense. We help kids identify their emotions, right? When you label the emotion that your child or adolescent is experiencing, it makes your kids more likely to be able to say that emotion in the future, right? I'm feeling so mad. I'm so frustrated, right? I'm so anxious. This is making me so sad, right? When they can label their emotions in that way, or when they hear you label their emotions, it actually brings down the intensity of the emotion that they're experiencing. And if your kids have ever watched Daniel Tiger, mine used to when they were little, at least my older one, I remember one episode where Daniel Tiger sings a song about feeling angry. And he says to the kids, when you're angry, say, grr, I'm so mad, right? And that is exactly the reason. When you can say it out loud, you have more control over the emotion that you're experiencing. And it slows you down. It slows down that response so that it's not emotion reaction. Emotion, you say it out loud, and that few seconds of saying it out loud can really stop a kid from reacting impulsively in their emotion. And so by you labeling the emotion for your child, you help them to get better at labeling their own emotion. And again, it helps them to feel heard and understood. And when a kid feels heard and understood, again, they're going to have better ability to control their emotion. So how to validate. I don't know what happened to the E on that slide. Sorry about that. So actively listening and noticing, right? And this is where those reflections from pride come in, where you are really trying to hear what your kid is saying. You're really taking notice of what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and you are repeating it back or reflecting it back to them to make sure that you understand what they're feeling in that moment. Describing the emotion your child is expressing, right? So they might not have the words to say, I'm so mad, or I'm so worried. They might be expressing it in other ways. But by you labeling that emotion, again, you're helping them with their emotional vocabulary and with their ability to regulate their emotions. Responding in a way that shows you're taking your child's emotion seriously. Again, by that listening, by describing or labeling that emotion, you are showing them that you're taking their emotion seriously. And this is the opposite of what we saw in that invalidating environment slide, right? Where sometimes we inadvertently dismiss a child's feelings, or sometimes we try to squash their expression of negative emotions because it's making us uncomfortable and we don't like to see our kids in distress. And so sitting there with them, listening to them, observing, describing, and noticing what they're experiencing shows them that you're taking it seriously. For this one, using and instead of but. And so this is a big one, especially in the DBT world, dialectical behavioral therapy. And so it might seem so small and insignificant, but this change of the word but to and really does make a difference. So what we tend to find is when we validate a kid and then say but, right? So it makes sense. You're feeling frustrated right now, but you can't hit your brother, right? Everything that came before the but went out the window, and what they focus on is everything that came after the but, right? And it actually can dysregulate a child more. I didn't hit him, he hit me first. You're not listening, you don't understand, right? When we use and, we are saying both are true, right? It's, I understand you're feeling frustrated and we can't hurt other people, right? Or, and there's no hurting others, or, and, right, whatever it is, that minor difference is saying both are true. And they tend to hear both as true and not focus on what came after the but. Validating your own emotions. And so this is so important, right? Sometimes as parents, we don't realize that some of the things that we're saying are invalidating of ourselves, and our kids hear this and they model it. They do what we do. They learn so much from us. So if we're saying, oh, it was so stupid of me to feel mad in that situation, or, oh, why did I overreact? Or what's wrong with me? Why am I acting like this? Why am I so upset? Right? When we say those kinds of statements, our kids hear, they internalize it and they use them themselves. And so by validating your own emotions, you're showing your kids that it's okay to feel a variety of emotions. So some practice. So practice validating. So the situation, your child's mad that screen time is over and they say, I hate you, or you're the worst parent. A way to validate them is to say, you're feeling mad that screen time is up, right? And that's a reflection. You're repeating back what they say. You're hearing them, you're listening. It's okay to be mad, because it is okay to be mad, right? We don't agree with what they said, but it's okay to feel mad in this situation. And then you can say, I get mad too when I have to stop doing things I like, right? Or sad, or whatever the emotion is. So this is just a good little practice that you can do. If anybody wants to kind of jump in and try one out, we can do that now, or you can look at it later on and, come up with some validating statements. Anybody want to try one? You can unmute yourself and jump in. Okay. If not, you'll move along, but I do encourage you to take a look at these. Even if it's not something that your kid, a situation that might come up for your kid, it is just good practice to think about and come up with validating statements. So a friend cancels a play date with your child. I would imagine maybe a kid feels disappointed, sad, right? It makes sense that you're feeling sad. I know you were really looking forward to this play date, right? So something along those lines. The next one. And I alluded to this a little bit, but it really is important for parents to model calm. And this is one of my favorite little quotes here. When little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not join their chaos. And so it's not uncommon for parents to get sucked in when their child is having a big response, a big emotional reaction to a situation. And we can really get sucked into that chaos and feel overwhelmed ourselves and have a big reaction. And so for parents, it's important to practice noticing that, taking a few moments before responding. You can mindfulness, which we're not doing today, but it is a helpful skill for parents to use to help them to be more aware of their thoughts, their judgments, and their feelings, to slow you down when your kid is having a hard time. And so just trying to notice that before you respond and trying not to get sucked into the chaos. Easier said than done, but when you really stay calm in a situation, it does help your child to calm down faster. So be a coping model. So we all experience big emotions from time to time. And it's okay to acknowledge that to your kids. So every night before bed, I read with my kids, either I or my husband will take turns. And sometimes my kids are really excited and wound up before bedtime, as kids can sometimes be when they're overtired. And I'm there ready to read the book, and they're maybe bickering back and forth or making each other laugh. And I notice myself getting frustrated, and maybe I've told them several times, and I'll kind of just sit back, close my eyes, take some breaths, and it always gets my kids' attention. They stop and they look at me and they're like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I was feeling really frustrated, so I'm taking some deep breaths before I help you guys to calm down." And so modeling for them in that way can really become, a tool that they use when they feel frustrated. So you talk about what you're doing and how you're coping with your feelings, and normalize having a range of emotions. We all get mad. We all feel frustrated. We all feel anxiety, sadness, and it's okay to have a range of emotions. It's completely normal. And making sure that they know that they hear that often. Okay. So what are some ways that you manage your own thoughts and emotions in situations that are triggering to you? Andrew is going to maybe.
Oh, I thought this was the one where you wanted to just leave it open to the chat, right?
Yes. Yes. If anyone wants to share how you manage your own big emotions.
Yep, you just type it in the chat.
Walking every morning. It's a good one. Very proactive. Music. Yes. Music's another good one. Swimming. Okay. Breathing. Yes. Take a break. Guitar. Yes. And sometimes that's right. Sometimes a little separation can help. Exercise and stretching. Great, great. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So in our last 10 minutes or so, restructuring thoughts, absolutely. I wanted to open it up for questions. I saw some questions in the chat, so if anybody.
Yes, and you have one question in the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Yes, I see it now.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is a good question. So hard to, make a diagnosis on such little information. It could be both. So the question is about, I think only I can see the question. Is that right? So the question is about a child who gets very emotional when someone's joking with them. And he takes the joke very seriously, has a hard time differentiating between like a joke and reality. And the question is whether this is a characteristic of autism or Asperger's or ADHD, and how to handle it. And so it could be either one. We do see, I have more experience working with kids who have ADHD. And so there is something in ADHD called rejection sensitivity. And so when kids feel rejected, they can, they can have very big reactions to perceived rejection or real rejection. And they can tend to be more sensitive to that perceived rejection. And so someone joking with them, they can be more sensitive to that and feel like it's a rejection. And so again, it's really about validating their feeling, because that's their experience of the situation, even if you think it's incorrect, an incorrect judgment or perception on their part. it still is leading to a feeling that they're having. And so listening and validating, listening to their experience and validating their emotion, and that can often help kids, again, feel understood, feel heard, and have better control over their emotional reaction. And then the other thing I would say is anytime someone jokes with them and they do remain calm, I would praise them for staying so calm in a situation where maybe in the past they would have gotten upset, or, even if it's a minor improvement, you really want to take notice of that and give them that positive feedback. Okay, I have another question asking about punishing outrageous behaviors, like threatening others or aggression. And I really strongly believe in all of the positive parenting skills first before any kind of negative consequence. Punishment doesn't really work without doing all of the other things first. Because what ends up happening is kids who have difficulty regulating emotions, if they were punished for every threatening, aggressive, kind of big reaction to an emotion, they would probably be being punished quite often. And so what we find is that starting with improving the quality of your relationship, making it really strong, really warm, giving a lot of positive feedback for appropriate behavior, the validation, the modeling of coping strategies, right? Doing all of that very intensely first is likely to reduce those behaviors without having to implement some sort of punishment. And it helps improve self-esteem, whereas being punished frequently, it has a negative impact on self-esteem. Yeah, and for kids as young as 5, it really, in terms of helping them identify their emotion, it really is just you saying what you're feeling, labeling the emotion, you naming the emotion that they're feeling when they're having big emotions. You talking about like, oh, it's okay to feel nervous. I feel nervous too sometimes. Sounds like you're feeling a little anxious about this situation coming up, right? Just saying those kinds of statements really will help your child be able to label their own emotions themselves. Okay, somebody's asking about how to know if a child needs therapy or outside help versus parents working on some of these things. And like I said, it really depends on, I would look at the frequency of when it's happening, the intensity of when it's happening, and the impact that it's having on their social emotional functioning across settings. And so if it's having a negative impact on friendships, on home life, right, it might be time. If it's happening, frequently and your child's feeling bad about it, you don't really have to wait until it's like so bad, right? Because therapy is helpful for really anyone who's experiencing even a little bit of this. Sometimes it could just be, 6 sessions or something, just helping them get the tools and skills, and parents get the support. So we do have some providers that are licensed in New Jersey, and we do telehealth, and telehealth is just as effective, especially in terms of parent training for individuals. Okay, someone's asking, when your child says they hate you, what do you think about validating and then addressing the behavior, or just focus on validating? I say just focus on validating. We don't want to give attention to the comments that we don't want to see more of, because there is some truth to, when you pay attention to a behavior, you're going to see more of it, right? And that's where we think about the pride skills. So when we are giving praise, when we're describing behaviors, right, we're giving attention to behavior, we're more likely to see that behavior. And in the same way, if we pay attention and focus on negative behaviors, it does tend to increase the frequency of those behaviors happening. So when a child says, I hate you, really just validating the emotion is enough. And I can give a quick example. So I mentioned that I have children myself. My older son has big emotions, and sometimes he and my husband can butt heads a little bit. And so my husband one day give him a comment. He took it as a criticism and got angry with my husband, said, I hate you, you're the worst, right? And I was sitting there and I turned to my son. I said, it sounds like you're feeling really mad at dad right now. And he was like, yeah, I am, right? So this happened again, similar thing. And I validated his experience. Sounds like you're feeling really mad, or I hear you sounding really mad right now. And then maybe third or fourth time of doing that, he said it again to my husband, I hate you, you're the worst. And then he stopped and he said, actually, I don't hate you. I'm just really mad at you. And it was a real big moment for him to recognize it's not that he hates his dad. It's just that he's having this really big emotion and he didn't know how to express it. And so by validating, you're really giving them the tools to express their emotion in a more appropriate way. So I didn't pay attention to the fact that he said, I hate you, inappropriate. Trust me, I want to respond to that, but I know that it is not effective to respond to that. What is effective is just to label that emotion and to help him have the tools to express his emotion in a more appropriate way.
And do you want to take one more?
Okay, I could take two because one is quick. Parent
Okay.
training, it really depends on the individual family. I have some parents who do 6 to 8 sessions. I have other families who maybe I'm working with for a few months. It really depends. Let's see, consequences. Yeah, so back to consequences versus punishment. So they're kind of similar, right? And if you're saying consequence, I'm thinking that you're probably thinking of like a negative consequence, like taking toys away or having to go sit in a timeout or sitting in their room or canceling a play date or something along those lines. And it is hard for it to be implemented without it feeling like a punishment, without it feeling very negative to a child. But again, what I would go back to is just saying that if you focus on those positive parenting skills and have a consistent like negative consequence that is explained to the child in advance, that is fair to the situation, right? That's not excessive, right? We don't want to be reacting in emotions, big emotions ourselves and saying, that's it, you're losing your tablet for the next 3 weeks, right? That's a big one that we often can't follow through it. But if you say, for hitting or hurting others, you will lose your tablet for 24 hours, right? And that's a rule that you come up with in advance, then I think it will feel less like a punishment and less negative. But again, I just really want to emphasize that needs to be coupled with all of the positive parenting tools, you know, with having one-on-one time, with giving a lot of positive feedback, because otherwise it can actually damage the relationship and a kid's self-esteem. Okay. I know there are more questions. I wish I had time to answer them all.
Yes, thank you again, everyone, for attending. I hope that you found today's webinar helpful and informative. If there are any other questions that we couldn't get to about today's webinar or about anything else, please feel free to reach out to us via the contact information that you see on this slide. Otherwise, take care, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay, bye.